now. It was 9, okay. But you're one, right? You're one of those
I
12?
am not one of the 12.
So good morning, everyone who's joining us in the room and also who's joining us virtually. We're going to call to order now, and we're going to do introductions. I'm Cynthia Daniels Hall. I'm an advocate out of Wake County, and I have children with autism.
Christy Hutchinson, EC Director, Lincoln Charter School, which is in the Southwest.
Good morning. This is Carol Ann Hudgens. I'm the Section Chief for Policy Monitoring and Audit, and I have the privilege of supporting the council in its work through my role as an EC Division staff.
I am Alexis Utz, the parent liaison, and hopefully running this smoothly.
And on the phone,
So for our attendees that are joining virtually, we're going to call on you one by one and unmute your mic so that you can introduce yourself. And we're going to start going down the attendee box in order. And our first participant is Adam Johnson. Adam, I'm unmuting your phone.
Carolyn, do we have to have our court reporter? Oh,
Good morning, Adam.
oh, there she is, Becky Scott.
Is that on?
Might be on mute.
He's good.
Adam, we're having a little difficulty hearing you.
Question mark in me.
And so, Adam, I'm going to get you to pause for a minute. And for those of you that are participating by webinar, if you will look at the audio tab on your communication screen, you might want to check to see how you are participating, either by computer audio, phone audio, or no audio. And if you are using your phone, there will be a call-in number and a PIN that will give you access to the voice controls. And that way you will be able to speak when prompted and when your mic is unmuted. So it will be really important that while you're participating online that you have your phone muted, or we'll get to hear an echo across the state from everybody's mic. And so I know that this is a bit awkward because we have more than usual participating virtually, but I feel certain we'll all get the hang of it very shortly. And so hopefully I've spoken long enough for Adam to check out his audio controls and see if he is able to introduce himself now.
Hey, good morning. Can y'all hear me now?
We can. Thank you, Adam.
Okay. All right. And just as luck we have it, we're apparently testing fire alarms this morning, so. Sorry. My name is Adam Johnson. I'm the Director of Education Services with People's Justice.
Welcome, Adam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anthony Baker, we see you, but. Anthony, we see that you are online, but it doesn't look like you have audio, so welcome. And we'll just go to the next one, which is Becky Scott. All right, good morning, Becky.
Becky, we're having a little difficulty with your audio, so we'll come back around. Cache Owens, if you will introduce yourself.
Hi there, good morning everyone. My name is Kat Owen, the Parent Training and Information Center Director at the Exceptional Children's Assistance Center, also known as the ECAC. Hope everyone's doing well today.
Thank you, Cache. Cameron,
All right, Cameron, you're on.
Hi, my name is Cameron Exel. I am a research assistant for Representative Blackwell in the General Assembly.
All right, welcome. All right, Diane, you're unmuted.
Hers isn't turning green.
She might not have her audio. All right, Diane, we'll come back to you. Jennifer, I'm unmuting you. Go ahead.
Hi there, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good morning. I'm Jennifer Deegan. I'm a facilitator at East Mecklenburg High School and Charlotte Lindbergh School.
Hi, good morning and welcome. All right. Kristen, you are unmuted.
Hi, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Good morning, welcome. All right. Looks like Leanna, you are, Leanna, can you hear us? Brother,
Looks like maybe she
Oh,
logged in
maybe-
twice.
yeah, there you go.
I'm Leanna. I'm from Johnson County. I have two working children on the autism spectrum, and look forward to participating in it. Thank you.
Good morning, welcome. All right, next we have Lisa Phillips.
Good morning, this is Lisa Phillips, the State Coordinator, Federal Education Program under Federal Program Monitoring and Support at DPI.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Christy Grant.
Good morning, this is Christy Grant, EC Director with Nassau County Schools, and I'm the traditional LEA representative.
Good morning. All right. And it looks like last on our list is it Sharita?
Sharita.
Maybe.
Sharita, your mic is open if you're ready to introduce yourself.
All right. Great, well, we'll try later. Let me just scroll through really quick, see if anyone else has joined us. It does not look like it. So it looks like everyone has been introduced. So Cynthia, I think we're good to go.
So I think we're going to do a quick review of the agenda, today's agenda. We have several items that were group activities. I don't know how we're going to do that. Any suggestions? Or just moving that to our next meeting, which is June. I will have a draft of the actual report for the board available probably by the end of this week, if not early next week. So I can send that out to all the chairs of the committees, okay?
I think that the committee time is not gonna be effective,
Yeah,
because we don't all have control over the online, so it's
Yes.
4 different committees, and the people that are chairs of those committees can't control it from online. So I sort of think that 1:30 to 2:15 time, we could bump, and I don't know what Sherry Thomas's personal schedule is like, but that could bump her up quite a bit.
Yeah, I'll be communicating with her
Okay.
to see if she can join us sooner rather than later. And I'm just going to repeat for those of us online, we're having a brief discussion here regarding the committee work that is planned in the agenda. And because of the virtual participation and the anticipated difficulties with breaking out in groups, it is looking like there is a recommendation from the chair that we reconsider those group activities for our next in-person meeting. If there are concerns or feedback from the participants virtually, feel free to let us know through the question or chat box. I'm going to go back to our chair at this time.
So, we do
Can I
have,
ask a question, a practical question? It doesn't have to be like public. I don't know if there's any value to getting in touch with the lunch.
We've already done that.
Just worried about waste.
It's coming, but it's half. Yeah. Yeah.
so a review of the December meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to see the December meeting minutes and review them?
So the question for those participating virtually is, have you had an opportunity to review the minutes online? I see that Alexis has brought them up for your review. Right now, we're making a correction on the date for that document.
Yes.
It is now displayed on your screen. And so we will gradually scroll upward so that you can see it. And while we're doing that, we'll see if staff can go ahead and attach that to the email that I just sent so you would have a copy at your desk. So we're going to go quiet for just a moment and try to get this document emailed to you while positioning some of it on your screen so you can participate right now while that email is on its way.
Are you looking for the date? I think it was the 11th. Okay. Okay.
Because it changes.
The view.
This screen will change.
Yeah. Just go ahead.
Okay, it's in change over.
So can we ask if online they have any corrections, additions, or changes for the December meeting minutes?
She's emailing them all.
Okay. Okay.
That's a big group, so.
It's okay. I'll get it. Judge corrected.
And Cynthia, just so you know, I pulled up comments and Kristen Hodges and Lisa Phillips also agreed to table the committee work. They were in agreement with that.
What does Christy Grant's comment say? I reviewed the transcript. Oh, online, I've got everything in there.
So we have scrolled through, I have scrolled through the summary of actions. We are in the process of getting it emailed out individually, but it has been scrolled through, so hopefully everyone was able to at least skim it as I had it up on the screen.
All right, so Cynthia has asked us if committee members have either had an opportunity to review the minutes online or now as we've been displaying it on the screen. And then also in your inbox is another copy of that I just sent to the council membership. And so in looking at the question and answer box, I see that one of our members, Christy, is making a recommendation that if these notes align with the online copy of the transcript, that she has no further concerns.
I don't know if you're looking for a second, but I second the
Can we get a
approval of the
motion?
minutes.
Is your motion?
I don't know if hers was the motion. I'm happy to be either the motion or the second. If she's,
I just offered that as a comment. I'm
Oh,
gonna
okay, it
ask
wasn't a
Christy if you're making a motion that we accept these minutes, and then I'll repeat that for the group, if so.
Leanna George is in approval of the minutes.
Okay, so we have a motion to accept the minutes as written from Leanna George. Do we have a second?
second it.
We have a second from Christy Hutchison here in the room. And so for us to verify by membership, if you could just type yes in the question box that you agree, and any concerns, please indicate such and we will address them. So we have a yes from Christy, a yes from Adam, a yes from Jennifer, a yes from Diane,
And a yes from Kristen.
and a yes from Kristen. I'm not seeing any in opposition. I see a yes from Leanna. And a reminder from our court reporter to please use the microphones. You may hear me repeat things for folks, and that's to the benefit of our court reporter, Becky Scott. She is transcribing this by virtual participation, and we will also be giving her the transcripts of this meeting so that she can cross-reference her notes. But oftentimes you're going to hear me repeat just to be sure our online participants can hear. We also have a yes from Lisa and Cache. It looks like we've had significant representation here to accept the meeting, so I'm going to ask the chair and the vice chair if they would like to go ahead and accept the motions and finalize these minutes.
Yes.
Okay, so both our chair and co-chair are indicating yes, and so I believe that concludes our review of the minutes, and so I will defer back to our chair for any next items on the agenda.
So our next item on the agenda is a OSEP visit debrief.
Okay, so I am just going to start this conversation, but I know that we had many of our council members were present during that opportunity that we had with OSEP, and so I am more than happy to share my perspective from our visit and what they shared with us on an anecdotal basis after, both during and after the visit. just as a means of introduction, we had our visit from the Office of Special Ed Programs the last week in January. They initiated this visit as a part of their differentiated monitoring and support model. And there were a variety of reasons that North Carolina was selected. I'm not sure if you recall, but it was 2011 since we had our last visit. It's not unusual for states to have visits from OSEP, just as the state in turn monitors local education agencies. They determine through a variety of criteria what would constitute a need to come visit. And so a couple of things factored into that. One, we had a new director, so that comes in. Another element is that North Carolina, given its size and its number of individuals with disabilities, we have a large IDEA grant, which also factors in. They want to be certain that we are allocating that grant and monitoring that those funds are being used appropriately on behalf of individuals with disabilities. We also had a number of concerns that had been expressed by some families over the course of the last few years regarding the SLD policy that would be starting in 2020. And so some of the school visits were geared toward asking about multi-tiered system of support and ensuring that there were no unintended barriers to children being located, identified, and if eligible, served under the category of learning disabilities. So there were a number of factors there, just a few more kind of less noteworthy that prompted their visit. And so they came and we had 3 days of interview with them here at NCDPI, and then the remaining days they visited schools. They visited Charlotte, Wake, charter school in Wake. They also visit Wake County schools, Wilson schools, and Wilson. So they randomly selected the locations that they would like to visit. They spoke with both instructional staff at schools, school leadership, district leadership, and DPI's role in those visits were simply just to introduce the schools to the OSEP members, and then those conversations were held independent of DPI because we wanted to preserve the opportunity for those individuals to speak to and answer any questions or express any concerns to OSEP in a very candid manner. And if there were anything that that we needed to look at with regard to how we operate, we certainly wanted that feedback from that experience. So during the first couple of days during interview, we had some guests from our council membership here. And I know that Christy participated. I know that Cynthia participated on some days. And I'm going to just pause and look to Cynthia to see if she has any comments or observations about that experience that she'd like to share.
So I had never participated in a visit from OSEP, an audit visit to the North Carolina. And it was very impressive to see the actual EC division and all the different chiefs and sections come together and answer the questions and provide information to OSEP. That was just amazing for me to see what the work of the EC division is and to see the people that do the work. Sometimes we only see those people as names or as presenters here in the room for the council, but to see them come together, their teams all together to answer the questions. And some of the questions were extremely challenging from OSEP. So that was my impression. Diane Coffey was there. Does she want to make any comment? And I think Cachet.
This is Diane. I echo what you said. It was very impressive. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, Diane, we can hear you.
Sorry, yeah, I couldn't tell. Anyway, I was very impressed with seeing that, and it was also, I was very impressed with how well DPI handled, the days. I know it was tough for all the staff that was answering the questions, but I was very impressed with the level of respect that you gave to OSEP, and it was a very interesting 3 days.
Thanks, Diane. I'm going to look to Cache to see if she has any observations or contributions she'd like to offer.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. I know that, here at EPAC, we had spoken to the OSEP folks before the meeting, and I think that they did a really good job of balancing, parent concerns that they had heard about, and then also, highlighting the things that we're doing really well here in North Carolina. So I thought it was a productive meeting from what I thought, and I'm excited to see what happens next.
All right, and then I will acknowledge Christy Grant to see if you'd like to offer any comments.
All right, Christine, go ahead.
I just echo what everybody said. I think Cynthia and Lynn have never been a part of an OSEP visit before, so we were able to the EC directors that were there were able to see a lot of the why behind some of the stuff that's funneled down to us, in the policies and procedures that the DPI has. So I think it was just an incredible experience, and, I learned a lot just from being there.
Thank you, Christy. And if I've overlooked a participant that was actually able to attend, please let me know, and we'll be glad to hear from you as well. Okay, I think we acknowledged everybody both in the room and online that participated.
Kristen Hodges said she attended as well.
Oh, I apologize, Kristen. Let's hear your feedback.
All right, Kristen, you're unmuted.
Hi, yes, I was only able to attend one day, but the day that I attended, I was impressed as well, with the level of, in-depth questions that were asked, the information that was provided, the level of respect given to North Carolina. It didn't feel like they were trying to catch them making mistakes. It felt like they were, providing, resources and support. And I also was interested in the level of autonomy in some ways that North Carolina had in terms of making some decisions, in particular the discussion about the timeline, and how North Carolina does it in comparison to other states, the timeline in relationship to when a request for testing is made. So I found it fascinating, which I could have stayed for more days. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen, and I apologize for overlooking your participation. For all of our council members, thank you for making the time to come and support us and to learn more about that process. I will have to echo that that's the first opportunity that I've had also on an OSEP visit. And from the perspective of sharing the work that we do in North Carolina, I was appreciative of the format in which they allowed us to do that. I also appreciated that while we were responding to their questions, that there was opportunity for discussion from both the participants that attended and were more audience-like to those of us that were required to provide responses. I think where it was appropriate to have council and LEA feedback, we deferred to them and invited our guests to offer any comments that they had. I think overall, it was an unusual experience because we had probably a membership of about 6 to 8 OSEP individuals that either participated virtually or in person. And then we had all of the division attend the first day in particular, because we wanted to show our investment in the work and in the feedback that we were hoping to get through this process, so that we can reflect upon those things that we might want to do better. I think that Sherry is likely to share more details about the outcome of the OSEP visit. I know that we have had the opportunity to just to have an informal debriefing with them by phone after their school visits. And it was nice to be affirmed in that our school visits shared their knowledge of how processes should work, and were able to answer questions provided by OSEP. I think there were some time for good dialogue in terms of always looking to improve our communication, not only from the department to the EC directors, but our partners in general education as well. I think that was a consistent thing that we all strive to improve upon. The schools and the LEAs that participated, again, put out the North Carolina welcome and created a space for good dialogue. And our anecdotal feedback from staff is that they enjoyed the opportunity to participate, and from their perspective, that they think that it went well. And so I'm going to kind of pause and leave some time for Sherry to add any additional comments to that this afternoon, and then defer back to Cynthia for any items next on the agenda, or any questions from the audience that we may not have addressed.
Caroline, we're not expecting a formal report for like 6 months to a year, right?
That is correct.
Okay,
And so
so
to
it's good to
repeat
know.
for the audience, Christy had asked the question about when we get a formal report, and they indicated to us it would be 120 days after their visit concluded. And so that's going to be a little bit of time for us. I will say that, not to steal any of Sherry's thunder, but they indicated on our informal call that while, of course, any findings are pending their completed activity, they did not immediately see any red flags that would be of great concern requiring
addressing now.
immediate intervention. So that was affirming. We do expect that we will have things that we will want to improve upon, and we are welcoming that feedback.
And how is that report, once it's received, how is that put out to the public or parents or schools or directors
Sure.
or parts of it?
Sure. I imagine that that report will have a public posting requirement along with it. So I anticipate, one, first and foremost, that we would deliver a copy directly to the council. And then second of all, I anticipate in some fashion that it will be posted to our website and will be communicated out, with others to be transparent in what those results were. All right, I'm checking the question box. It doesn't look like we have any other questions or comments right now. Cynthia, I think
So
if
our
you're ready to
schedule is
move
a break.
forward. Okay, so we have the opportunity for a quick break. Would you like to go ahead and take maybe a 10 or 15-minute break, and I will have a text to Sherry to let her know we're kind of moving through the agenda
We
pretty
can take our
quickly.
15-minute break.
Okay, so for those of you participating virtually, we're going to take a 15-minute break. And so we will be muted here in the room. We have 10:06, so we'll look to come back at 10:21.
pissed.
Do you want me to test this
Time
one
to
for,
come back.
Hang on, my computer is
Mrs.
slow. Becky, we're gonna test microphones to see if you can hear Christy now because she switched microphones.
Hi Becky, we're missing you today. Does that thanks mean that she
All
heard me
right,
this time?
Becky, can you just let us know
Yep.
if you were able to hear Christy?
Okay. Okay, must have been the mic then.
Oh, yep, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, there we go. All right. And
We're back.
Yep.
AU policy with Carol Ann.
All right, good morning, everyone. We are coming back into our meeting. We did a microphone test, and we're hopeful that you are able to hear us again. I have been given an opportunity to share with the council or otherwise provide an additional clarification around the AU policy, just to be certain that our council and families and anyone who is participating understands the requirement and when the requirements go into effect for individuals who are suspected of having autism as a disability or individuals that may be entering into the reevaluation process since the new policies went into effect. And so one of the things that I wanted to share with you all is that this opportunity to look at the policy and the tip sheet is an opportunity that keeps giving, and we want to make sure that are clear in what our expectations are and that we are providing folks the details that they need to continue to handle this with care. One of the key points that we have been clarifying from this tip sheet is the statement number 5, the scheduling of the reevaluation of children with autism should occur well in advance of eligibility due date to ensure that the parental consent for motor screening and sensory process evaluation absent existing data is obtained and evaluations are conducted to ensure the timely reevaluation of children with autism. And so the questions that we received from the field was essentially categorized in 2 ways based on this key point. One, LEAs asked for clarification about whether this meant that if a child had been previously identified as an individual with autism prior to January 1, 2020, did that mean then that they had to immediately initiate a reevaluation and obtain the 2 new evaluations that have been included in the policy? And the answer to that is no, that individuals with autism who are on their reevaluation cycle, which we also call the triennial, which means that we have to review the eligibility and to make sure that we have adequate information for programming, that must occur once every 3 years unless the parents and the school district believe that they need to initiate a reevaluation sooner. And so one of the things that we wanted to clarify with the field is that just because the policy changed in January did not mean now that all individuals with autism had to be retested. That is not accurate. And so those reevaluation decisions and whether or not to conduct additional testing needs to come along the natural timeline progression for students who have to be reevaluated. I have some more slides on this a little further along in the slide deck, so I will repeat this multiple times. So one thing we just wanted to make sure of is that families understand that this is not intended to create statewide retesting of individuals with autism. That should just occur with our natural course of business. And this statement in particular, for our children that may have already had an identification of autism, when it is time for their 3-year triennial, that we want to make sure that IEP teams are not waiting too close to the due date to have their reevaluation meetings. And we're encouraging this planning early of IEP team meetings to be certain that if a parent request or a school district believes that they need additional evaluation, meaning the motor screening and sensory processing evaluation was not already a part of that child's record, that they had time to talk through what those evaluations would mean with parents, obtain their written permission to conduct those evaluations, then have time to conduct the evaluations and come back as a team to discuss how that new information could potentially provide more information about how to review and revise an IEP to make sure that all of a child's unique needs were addressed, particularly those through sensory needs and motor needs, in addition to affirming that the child continues to be a child with a disability. And so this statement only meant plan ahead. Parents are likely to have questions. School teams are likely to have questions. And you don't want to run the risk of trying to have a reevaluation meeting the day before an eligibility expires in the event that you need to do something more. And so this recommendation would be consistent regardless of what disability category is being revisited at reevaluation, whether it's autism, traumatic brain injury, specific learning disability, and so forth. Teams should plan in advance of those eligibility due dates to make sure that if testing is needed, it can be conducted and returned to the team before that eligibility expires. All right, so if you'll move ahead, Alexis, for me. So this is just kind of to give some additional written guidance through things that I've already touched on. And so as you are aware through other council meetings and communications that we have provided from the division, on January 1st, 2020, our autism policy was revised to include 2 new evaluations. That is sensory processing and motor screening. And so what we wanted to remind LEAs about, and all of our teachers and service providers, is that after January 1, if a child was referred for the very first time and autism was suspected as a disability, then they needed to adhere to the new policy. And I think that most LEAs and most service providers and families understand this for new business. And as I alluded to on the previous slide, it's when we have children who have already been identified that the questions become a little bit more extensive. So again, to reiterate this slide, it is indicating that if a child is suspected of autism for the very first time after January 1, that they need to go ahead and use the new AU policy. Now, in doing so, as with any disability category, an IEP team is required to review any existing data. So, a parent may have a medical or a private evaluation that they have had conducted independent of the school district. That would be a piece of existing data that we would want the IEP team to consider. There could be other existing data that is present for the child that meets the definition of sensory processing evaluation or motor screening. And so if there is existing data and it meets the definition of what those 2 evaluations require, And the motor screening and the sensory processing evaluation, it has been reviewed by the appropriate personnel, including occupational therapists and so forth. Then that existing data can be reviewed by the IEP team, and if it's determined that it's current and relevant, it can be used for consideration in the eligibility determination. If it's not considered current and relevant, then the IEP team will need to make a recommendation that those evaluations are conducted, explain the evaluation to the parent, and make sure that the parent is able to provide informed consent about those evaluations. So if we'll go on to the next slide, and you can go at one more slide. So the tricky part, as I mentioned, is what happens to children who have had an eligibility as autism and has been identified with autism for quite some time. And so for those individuals, as I mentioned to you earlier in the presentation, we have to review this every 3 years to make sure that we have the information necessary to determine that the child continues to be a child with a disability, that we have adequate information to make sure that their individual unique needs are identified, and that we have developed and or reviewed and revised the IEP to make sure that the programming is appropriate for their needs. So in moving to the next slide, there are several additional reasons that we might conduct a reevaluation. The previous slide was just the overall definition of reevaluation. And so if you can see on the screen, I have put some notes in here in red regarding programming or eligibility. And just in a brief description, there are times, for example, that the IEP team may initiate a reevaluation that has nothing to do with the child's eligibility category. It may be that the child's unique needs have changed and one formal evaluation might be necessary. An example I use often is a functional behavior assessment. A functional behavior assessment is not a required screening or evaluation for any disability category. However, it is a very important evaluation that sometimes is needed for working with children who have challenging behaviors. And so if a functional behavior assessment was necessary, then a reevaluation would be initiated to obtain the parent's consent to conduct the functional behavior assessment, because that information is needed for what we call programming, which is ensuring that the IEP is reviewed and revised, a behavior intervention plan is developed if appropriate, and the child's unique needs regarding behavior are addressed. So you will see here under the reasons for conducting that I have noted by the policy citation when it could be programming and when it could be eligibility. And I note this because anytime a reevaluation includes an eligibility decision, the team must be sure that they have all the required evaluations and screenings for that eligibility type. That ensures that we have, one, adequate information for determining that there is a disability, and two, as a result of those unique needs associated with that disability, the IEP team can develop an appropriate IEP for the student. And so some of the reasons for conducting that are included in policy is that anytime a parent request an additional evaluation, which you see in A2, or if at any time the LEA believes that they need more evaluation to develop the IEP, they can request an evaluation. And that's what I was describing with the functional behavior assessment. And so when we go a little further under the limitations, it says that we cannot do a reevaluation more than once a year, or more often really than the 3 years, unless the parent and the LEA agree otherwise. And most often, if we're doing it sooner than the 3-year evaluation, it is because we need an additional assessment to develop the IEP with. So you'll see here that at any time, a child or a teacher could request additional evaluation data if they feel like they need something more to develop the IEP, or if they suspect that the eligibility category has changed. For example, we're all familiar with the category of developmentally delayed. That eligibility category is only reserved for our very young children, and it has to be considered before the child turns 8 or goes into the 3rd grade. So that would be an occasion in which the IEP team would initiate a reevaluation for both eligibility and programming, because the eligibility category is subject to change. Okay? So if we look at must occur at least once every 3 years, that is our responsibility to look at both the programming and the eligibility. And as the definition stated on the previous slide, we're looking to make sure that the child is still a child with a disability and that we are, in fact, programming appropriately for that student by their IEP. Other reasons that we might have to conduct a reevaluation is that if we suspect that the child may no longer be a child with a disability, we have to go through the evaluation process, the reevaluation process, to determine that. So that would be a change. Not only is the change for if there is no longer a suspected disability, but as in the previous example, if that disability is suspected to have changed. Paragraph 2 and 3 talk about when children exit from high school, either by graduating with a regular diploma or students that have aged out. You don't have to conduct a reevaluation at those points in times. However, again, be mindful of the team's right to initiate that if there are other reasons that they deem appropriate. And then paragraph E3 here simply says that if children are aging out or graduating, we have to do the summary of performance for that child, because that summary of performance is a document that enables the child to advocate for himself or herself if they are seeking some accommodations either in the workplace or in post-secondary, college, university, or otherwise. That summary of performance shares that child's educational background, the accommodations and supports that were necessary to help them access their program in school. All right, we can move ahead. I am scanning from time to time the question box, and it sounds like folks are following with me along the question box. And I'm kind of looking at our participants here in case there are questions. But this slide just reemphasizes things that I've already spoken to. Anytime eligibility is a part of a reason why a reevaluation is necessary, we have to be sure that we are reviewing all the data associated with that eligibility category. So Alexis, if you can move to the next slide. One of the questions we have received is related to when a reevaluation is conducted and perhaps the child has an extensive history of requiring special education and related services. And there is all the information necessary to continue to support that. That is often called a no-test reevaluation, in which the IEP team, in consultation with the parent, agrees that all the required evaluations are there for the child's disability, and the team believes that they have all the information necessary to develop a good IEP for the student. The IEP team can then decide that they don't wish to test any further. But if you recall, again, a couple of slides back, if there is that decision not to test, the parent still has the right to request an evaluation. And if you move on, Alexis, I believe I've attended to that in the next couple of slides. Actually, if you'll go back to me, back for me. I've had several iterations of this presentation, so I apologize. Go forward one more. There you go. And so one of the things that I do really want to point out is at the no test evaluation that, again, the parent has the right to request an evaluation if they disagree with the IEP team's decision that no testing is necessary. So at that point, there will be an opportunity for the IEP team to discuss the parent's request for an evaluation, whether it is the request for updated information on one of their particular assessments. For example, maybe a speech and language evaluation was done some time ago and the parent requests an updated one, they can certainly request that. Or if a parent has a concern about the eligibility category and believes the eligibility category is different or has changed or is not present, any of those reasons can be addressed through the parent's right to continue to ask for an evaluation, even though the district may not be recommending that one is necessary. The parents do have the right. I'm going to pause right there in case there are questions from the audience around the parent rights around evaluation and reevaluation. That was a lot of information just kind of front-loaded right there. We have definitely provided this clarification opportunity in multiple formats. We reviewed it again at March Institute. These particular slides were shared during the director's webinar, and I've just repurposed them for our meeting today so the messaging is consistent.
We do have a question.
I got it. And so we have a question from the audience. If a reevaluation is requested, is there a time frame that the reevaluation should be completed by? And so this is an excellent question, and I'm going to give you a lot of information in answering this question. First, I will kind of orient us back to what the regulations and the policies require. So the regulations and the policy require for an initial evaluation, meaning the first time that a child is ever suspected of a disability, that there is a 90-day timeline in North Carolina in order to make that decision. That is the initial evaluation. So as we come to the question about a reevaluation timeline, the reevaluation, as you know from our previous conversation on this topic, is not the first time that a child has been evaluated. It will be the first time that they are reevaluated after the initial. And so the question here is there a timeline for that? And the response is, the regulations say reasonable. They don't provide us a specific timeline in which that reevaluation is to occur. Now, I believe I understand why this question is so important, is that there have been times where reevaluations have been initiated and families have experienced a prolonged amount of time before they have received the results. And that is not what DPI would be considering as reasonable. And so while each situation is unique in and of itself, one of the things that I will just kind of comment, generally speaking, is that we had a little bit of extra noise here, so I paused. So when we're considering a reevaluation and the timeline associated with it, a couple of things come to mind for me in terms of what technical assistance I would offer for both families and districts. For example, if that reevaluation was initiated for programming, it would certainly make sense that we would consider when that next annual IEP would be due, and would we have the results in time to add that to the present levels of performance to make sure that our programming is appropriate. Because if a team is initiating a reevaluation sooner than the 3 years, clearly it has a concern for new data. And so the level of concern for that new data should be balanced across when the IEP is due to be revised or when it should be revised. So in the example of functional behavior assessment, unless we start evaluating and intervening on problematic behavior, things could get a whole lot worse. So there are a lot of reasons that a reevaluation should be expedited and attended to in a timely fashion. For those reevaluations that involve eligibility, any reevaluation including testing to consider the disability category, it should be done before that eligibility due date expires. In other words, the IEP team should come together in advance of a meeting, proving the point again at the beginning that I offered about planning in advance. So if my reevaluation due date, my eligibility due date was May 1st, it might be reasonable that I have a meeting about now to understand if we have what we need. And if we don't, we have time to get what we need in terms of evaluations and come back together before that eligibility expires on May 1st. So, Diane, I took a long, windy road to answering your question. Just to kind of summarize, there is no regulatory timeline for when reevaluations must be completed, with the exception that we have to do it once every 3 years. And so after it's been initiated, there is no timeline for that. But all of the extra information that I gave you in my response are things that I would hope that IEP teams would consider when addressing the timely results that a reevaluation may be initiated for. So I'm going to pause right there and see if there's any follow-up questions to that. All right, so if we will just continue to move on. So now I'm going specifically back to individuals suspected of autism, because this is where we were asked for clarity regarding the reevaluation. So if a student has a disability of autism and comes due anytime now after January 1st, you have to look for the review of existing data as we always would, but this time, in addition to the normal review of existing data, we have to make sure that we have the sensory processing information and the motor screening. If we don't, we have to get consent from the parent to conduct that, and we have to conduct it and come back to the table before the child eligibility expires. These are just some reminders that I included here about the 3-year clock, the triennial date, when we have to consider these things. One of the things that I also want to draw emphasis to is that we've had questions from families and school districts about the 2 new evaluations, and would those 2 new evaluations potentially render an individual with autism as someone that could not qualify for services any longer? And my response to that is this. Those 2 new evaluations not only contribute to an eligibility determination, but if you recall, they also can contribute to having an adequate IEP in place for the child. And as we know, with any process that we engage in EC, we have to consider multiple sources of data, and we have to look at the whole picture together. I would be concerned if all of a sudden children who had had a history and well-documented evaluation results as an individual with autism all of a sudden became ineligible as a result of 2 new evaluations. I would have concerns on 2 directions. One, would there have been an overemphasis on 2 new evaluations to the exclusion of historical information that is necessary to also consider the eligibility? And two, was the identification conducted properly in the first place? And if it did not have a proper analysis, should the team be suspecting something in addition to or in place of autism? So what I'm trying to kind of allude to here is that there is a fear in the field that all of a sudden children will not become eligible for AU any longer that were previously eligible. And I think that would be extremely rare. There certainly is the possibility out there, but in knowing what we know about autism and our previous required assessments, they were pretty substantial, and those decisions have to be carefully made. And so it would be unlikely and unusual in the extreme for these two new evaluations to adversely impact a child's continuing eligibility in the category of autism.
I don't want to derail you, but from somebody who's lived through it, and Jennifer probably could speak more than anybody because she's an OT, but I just think it gives you more information to set those OT goals if that's appropriate, or OT service plan or whatever it is, but just gives you more information to develop a well-developed IEP.
Thank you, Chrissy. I appreciate that. Are there any other comments kind of on this slide? I'll give a minute in the question box and see if anyone types in anything to either comment or add to. All right, well, we'll move on to the next slide. And again, if the reason involves a reevaluation, this slide is very similar to the last slide. Anything that involves an eligibility decision, you have to look at all of the paperwork and the eligibility worksheets and the required evaluations. For the purposes of the different audiences I worked with, this is why we went very specific in these slides. I think for the purposes of this group, I think we've kind of reiterated again the differences between children with existing eligibility and children who might be referred for the very first time. So you certainly have these slides in your slide deck that I've provided to you by email. If you'll click on through, the difference with this slide is that, as I mentioned earlier in the example of functional behavior assessment, if we're not dealing with eligibility for a child with autism and you're only looking at programming, maybe it's not the 3-year date, maybe I just need a functional behavior assessment, then you don't have to also get the sensory processing and the motor screening, because that's not really your purpose that you're coming to the table for. However, this slide says that you can, if you're getting the functional behavior assessment and you just want to go ahead and collect the sensory processing and the motor screening to develop a really good IEP, that the IEP team can do that. They still have to deal with eligibility when the triennial comes, but of course, according to the policy, if a parent or teacher asks for a reevaluation ahead of that time, they can do so. And one more going forward. And so this is just a slide left over from March Institute where I asked them if they wanted to have more information after the webinar, and they did. And so I presented at March Institute last week on the topic again, just to be certain everyone has a clear idea. And that kind of brings us to the close of my my clarification around the AU policy. And I'm going to look to Cynthia and Christy. And in our planning meeting, I know this was a topic that you guys wanted me to address to make sure our council had a good understanding and had the opportunity to ask any additional questions. I'm going to see if there's anything you want me to highlight or emphasize differently. And I'm going to be taking a peek in the question box also. Now's a good time.
Is Katie online? Because I know this is really close to the work that she does.
Katie Holler. She's not able to continue with the council at this
Okay.
time, so she's not participating today in
You
today's
just had a
meeting.
couple people that worked really closely with this area of
Oh,
eligibility.
sure. We have different individuals. So I have a question for Cameron here. And so, yes, PLAF does indicate the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. So thank you for calling me out on our acronyms. And have the AU guidance documents been completed and published? I believe that I have previewed those materials and provided any feedback and comments to those. I believe that our parent communication is going out. I'm kind of looking across at Sherry to help me recall about our AU guidance documents. I believe our parent information
They're both online.
has been translated and provided online, and our other documents have been as well. And thank you, Alexis, for navigating there. That's our homepage of the EC Division website, and that's where you can find some supplemental materials there.
For those of you online that wanted to see it, sorry.
So Carol Ann, I think Cameron was asking for an explanation of what PLAF stands for.
Yes, and I'm affirming that his clarification is correct. It is the present level of academic achievement and functional performance.
All right.
All right, more than happy to address any questions. You are very welcome to email me afterward if something occurs to you when you're reviewing the slide deck or something has occurred to you after we meet. I'm happy to respond to any questions. I'll just also offer that we do have consultants for the area of autism here at the department. And if you are on our webpage and you navigate to Division Staff tab, you can see how our consultants are divided across the state. And so we have a consultant for the area of autism identified for each part of the state. I'm not exactly sure how that broken up, but we have several consultants that are able to assist if you have additional questions. And Alexis is taking you there to the directory. And you can see there how they're divided up. And their area of expertise is right there up at the top. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol Ann. So,
Cynthia, do we want to go ahead and change? Oh, I'm not speaking. Do we want to go ahead and change our agenda to consider moving the public comments up? Understanding that
But
if
I-
somebody came after and signed in?
I wanted to make sure that Sherry had time.
Yes, she just had to step out for a phone call. And so
So we could do the
if we
public
want to
comment
just,
first?
pardon me?
We could do the
Public
public
comment.
comment first.
I'm comfortable with that if that's how you guys want to proceed. I don't want us to overlook the opportunity if someone else comes in at 12:30. But if y'all are ready to have that part of the agenda, I don't see a concern.
Okay, we are.
There's no public comments online, right?
None that I'm aware of, no.
Or that came in electronically or
in.
anything that need to be read?
I'm
Okay.
not aware of any.
Alexis is saying note as well.
Do you want me to go?
Okay.
I'm looking to the chair. Would you like me to review the guidelines for our public comments
Yes.
portion? Okay. Just as a reminder to our council and any guests that we have in the audience today, our guidelines for public comments or public input are just the following reminders. Public comments can be made in person or written form. Priority will be given to in-person comments. Written comments will be read by the chairperson in the order that they are received, and all written comments will be documented. As you recall, we just verified that there were no written comments submitted by the council email, and so we have an in-person guest that we'll acknowledge in a moment. Our public comment is limited to no more than 5 minutes per person in the first 30 minutes of the afternoon session, and sign-in must occur by 12:30. Written comments should be emailed, and we have that information here on our handout. And comments should be focused on relevant topics to the submission of the council. No solicitation is allowed. The public comment opportunity is not a forum for vendors to market goods or services. It is for individuals to share concerns and successes that could help shape future direction in the accomplishment of the council's mission, which is stated below. Also, as a reminder to our participants online, all public comments will be taken under advisement by the council, but will not receive verbal or written response, either during the public comments or after. Public comments will be summarized in the meeting minutes, and the council will review public comments and decide on appropriate action, if any, according to the council's mission. And so, when making a comment in person, we have the sign-in. When we invite the individual making public comments, if you would, please give us your name, your county of residence, and the subject matter of your public comment. And then comments should be factual, objective, and related to the mission of the council. We request that confidentiality and privacy standards are maintained, and that personal names of student or school staff are not mentioned. Members of the council will not interrupt the speaker during the allotted 5 minutes of time. The chairperson may interrupt the speaker if there is a concern that public comment procedure and/or privacy or other laws are being violated. And so that is just our general reminders around public comment. A copy of these guidelines are provided to those seeking public comment when they sign in. And so at this time, I'll ask our chairperson if she's ready to acknowledge our public commenter.
I am ready to acknowledge our public commenter.
Good morning, I'm Amanda Harrison and I'm from Wake County. I'm also a member of the Triangle Area Dyslexic Advocacy Group. I'm also a parent of a child with dyslexia and dysgraphia. We had to remove him from Wake County Public School System after we refused an evaluation for testing for a suspected learning difference. I wanted to come here today to give feedback from a growing number of parents who are telling us that their children are being placed onto an IEP under a category that they feel is inappropriate. Many children who have been formally diagnosed with a specific learning difference, for example, dyslexia or dysgraphia, are then being given eligibility under other health impairment. OHI is usually the primary, with SLD as a secondary service. Parents are advising this is generally against their wishes, and more often than not, they feel they have not been allowed meaningful participation during the IEP meeting, and definitely not an equal member of the decision-making process. It appears children's unique and specific needs are not being met, and an appropriate IEP is not being developed. Families are very frustrated at the process and feel there is little oversight of LEAs making these decisions. One particular child with another health impairment eligibility as the primary category has recently been invited to a Read to Achieve reading camp. This child has a formal diagnosis of dyslexia and dysgraphia and is on an IEP. His parents fought hard not to have OHI as the primary category. However, they were told during the eligibility process that the particular label would not matter. The parents feel their child's needs are not being met appropriately, and now to be invited to a reading camp as a struggling reader is particularly frustrating. We are unsure why this is happening to so many people. A very simple question posted within our group asked how many parents had received an IEP for OHI as a primary category and felt it was appropriate. 14 responses were received within 2 hours of posting the questions from families who said that this had been their experience. It's a disturbing trend that is wholly inappropriate fails to meet a child's unique needs, which should always be at the forefront of the decision makers on the IEP team. It also defeats the purpose of serving a child with learning differences if those interventions are not going to be appropriate. Thank you.
Do we want to move up Sherry's?
Can do whatever you need me to do today.
Well, we'd like to move your comments and your updates up
Okay,
to now.
sure. So good morning.
Good morning.
This is Sherry Thomas, Director of the Exceptional Children Division, and I'm delighted to be with you today. And are you going to be my driver? Yep. All right. Alexis is going to drive. So I do have some updates. I have some slides, and I apologize. I was working late until the night last night trying to make sure we had staff protocols in place and some cancellations that we needed to cancel because of the state of emergency that's now been imposed on us. And so I didn't get this to Carol Ann till this morning, but I'm sure we will send this out. So thank you for your patience. If you're online, you should be able to see it. Some exciting news. And Christy, I apologize because you were at March Institute, and some of this is going to look like old hat to you because these were some of the updates I shared with directors last week, but I also thought they were pertinent to share with council as well. So we have some new staff in place. Carol Ann is, I think, now fully staffed. We say that quietly because somebody will leave or retire or find a new opportunity. So for now, Libby Loring has just joined us. She comes from Winston-Salem, where she was in a monitor role there, and she's a program monitor for our North Central region and supporting charters, and we're delighted to have her. She started about a month ago, close to that, right, Carol Ann? About a month ago?
Yes.
Adam Parent has joined us as an IDEA fiscal monitor. He was previously the assistant director in Henderson County as the assistant EC director there. I don't dare go back into that county anytime soon because we've yanked two really good people out of that district, and now they're state employees, but we're thrilled to have him, and he will be serving the Northwest and the western part of our state, doing the fiscal monitoring, supporting the grant application from our districts, and he'll be working with both traditional and charter schools in those two areas. And then we have Bridget LeCompte, and Bridget is our brand new occupational therapy consultant. She was in North Carolina, did some work here, went to school here, moved to Virginia, and so we got her back in North Carolina to work with us, and she started about a month ago as well. And then two shifts that we've had, Jennifer Sims and Kalila O'Farrell have been in our ECATS delivery team and now, our CCAS delivery team and now our ECATS support team. And they worked previously supporting CCAS and doing training, and they have now shifted over, and they are going to be in our special programs and data section, which is under Amanda Bird as the section chief. But they will still continue to be doing support. Their titles are user support specialist, and they will continue to be supporting local directors and their teams around ECATS and the implementation of ECATS, including training and problem solving. They will also work with grant support and probably be involved in some of our monitoring activities. So we're thrilled to have them there. As some of you were aware because you attended with us, and I was very grateful to have two representatives from council with us during our OSEP visit. We had a 5-day visit from OSEP. 3 of those days were in our building and 2 days were out in districts. They visited Charlotte Meck, East Wake Charter, Wake County, and Wilson County schools. And in Charlotte and Wake, they visited either a pre-K or an elementary, and then a middle and a high school. In Wilson County, they visited, I believe, an elementary or a K-8 school. And then they had conversation with central office in those districts as well. Particularly in the district visits, OSEP was looking at learning disabilities, and in particular, has there been a delay of referral or eligibility determination due to a multi-tiered system of support or an intervention process that was delaying those referrals to happen, as well as looking at private psychiatric residential treatment facility placement, if schools have been engaged in that process, if they've had any interaction with those areas. With our visit here in the building, next one, the focus was on, again, on our SLD policy and the multi-tiered system of support framework that we have in place across the state. Whether there had been child find delays due to MTSS or the intervention process, again, PRTFs. They also looked at our sub-recipient monitoring. So this is when we get the IDEA grant from the federal government, and then districts complete their grant application, and we fund the state aid through a PRC code back out to the districts as their federal dollars to support special education. It looked at how we notify them, what the review process is like, and then how we monitor the use of those federal funds. They also looked at how we do our program monitoring, how we're looking at compliance. We talked about state complaints, and in particular, any state complaints around child find, due process corrective actions, how we follow up not only on our state complaints, but if we do follow up on due process, how that is occurring. We did have a debrief with OSEP representatives last week regarding just the visit to LEAs. I am happy to report that at this time, they reported no red flags to us in those conversations with the districts, particularly around the SLD policy or MTSS, so that was good to hear. They have told us we will have a report within 120 days from their visit. I'm not going to commit that we will have that because other states, one state in particular I know had a visit in May and they still don't have their report, and this is March. So we're expecting at some point we will have a report, and we will be following up on actions. But through the discussion with OSEP over those 3 days, we also came to the determination, based on some of the questions they asked, that there's some areas that we can go ahead and start enhancing, tweaking, doing maybe a little better or more thorough piece of work around. For example, the due process, there's no requirement that we do that actually, but we want to be good faith partners and ensure that we are supporting districts and parents in a due process complaint to ensure that corrective action is in place. So Carol Ann and her section and I are going to be working together to create something we're going to go ahead and put in place. It would be nice for them to come back with a report and us already have all those things in place. So
that's the due process?
that's the due
Parent has
process.
already requested it, then following up with a monitoring visit after the due process? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is we are going to come together to create a structured follow-up process. It doesn't mean we'll do a state complaint after that. But currently, the guidelines do not require us to do any direct follow-up, although we communicate with the districts and we get the communications from the hearing officer. There's nothing that at this point requires us to do a formal follow-up, like a letter. Like when there's a state complaint, we must follow up with a letter, and then we close that out when we know all the compliance has been met. We've been removed because we believe that system removes us, but we also got the impression that OSEP feels like we need to be a little more engaged to ensure that districts are following up on their due process corrective actions. So even though we haven't leveraged the action, they're wanting us to oversee it. So we're going to come up with a way that we hope will be palatable to all entities and be able to check that off the list immediately. We'll go back just a minute and see if I missed anything. Oh, I think I got all that. So we've had some heavy traffic to consultants and to both Matt Hoskins, Assistant Director of the division, and me around the Read to Achieve requirements, and in particular ensuring that all students with a disability are participating. There had been some previous guidance that removed students on our extended content standards from that requirement, which did not come from our division and did not come from accountability. Sometimes things get started and it becomes reality rather than a theory or a belief, and I believe that's what happened to this. We sent out a memo around guidance for this January the 29th. So just in a nutshell, all students with disabilities shall participate in iStation. If that's not appropriate, then the team should look at an assessment from the alternate list that's been approved by the state board. If that's not appropriate, and in particular students on the extended content standards, then the IEP team needs to determine an appropriate measure to look at literacy growth and progress for students on the extended content standards. Doesn't have to be necessarily a formal measure. It has to be some type of progress monitoring that they should be doing anyway to measure the growth on the IEP goals. So we don't feel like we're asking folks to do something that is different. It's not a set assessment for the extended content standards. And for some of those students, there may be items on that alternate list that's been approved that would be appropriate. There's a paper pencil option there, for example, that some of the students might be able to respond to. The goal is to get data through a progress monitoring process to ensure that we are monitoring growth on IEP goals and looking to see how that student is increasing their literacy skills, even on extended content standards. So we've given a lot of guidance around that. I'm still clarifying that question for people because there is not an appropriate or approved alternate list for extended content standard students for this assessment. That really has to be an IEP team decision. Some districts are using a curriculum with these students that has a built-in progress monitoring. That's great. Others are doing informal progress monitoring. My goal is they're looking at that IEP goal around literacy and measuring that goal, and that in essence is going to show us if the student's making growth. Reading camps, there's a lot of discussion about reading camps right now, and just some clarifications I put forth with the directors last week, that third grade students who meet the good cause exemptions will become a low priority for reading camp, because the goal of reading camp is to increase that student's knowledge so they can meet that target and not be retained. That's the purpose of the reading camp. It's not extended school year. It can't be used as extended school year. And so it doesn't mean that a student who has met a good cause exemption for the retention part, because that's all the exemption is good for. It's not about testing. It's about whether or not they must be retained in third grade. But if they meet the qualifiers in good cause exemptions, they are going to be moved to the low priority list for reading camp, because that has to be accessible to those students who have not met those exemptions and still haven't passed the requirements based on the legislation. We are also trying to give guidance around the appropriateness of a student on the extended content standards in going to reading camp. It doesn't, again, mean that they can't be invited. They are going to be low priority because they've already met those exemption criteria through good cause exemptions. This is becoming apparently a factor in thinking about first and second graders who are on extended content standards. But again, they are going to be low priority because they are already on an extended track, not on a diploma track, not following that guideline or hitting those requirements for retention. And again, it can't be ESY for those students as well. State budget, we didn't get one this year. What we have is a continuation of last year's budget. So everything that we are allotted from a state level has been at the amount that was in the 18-19 fiscal year budget. So there was no increase in anything. It was maintaining that same budget, and that includes our state aid for students with disabilities that goes out through one of our PRC codes. Federal state aid has been allotted. Our IDEA funds are being allotted or have been allotted. So folks should have funds now. Now, good news, because that felt like some downer news. We have been talking about this for about a year and a half, but we finally got a contract approved to work with the Council for Exceptional Children's National Office to develop a Supporting New Teachers in Special Education program. And this is to support those first-year teachers of exceptional children, not lateral entry at this time, but certified teachers with a first year in the classroom experience. And it will pay for them to be a member of the Council for Exceptional Children. It will provide access to some ongoing professional development. We will be creating cohorts regionally across our state. They'll have resources, they'll get some books, they'll get journals, they'll have online resources. They will get some virtual mentorship that may be in the role from CEC, that may be from our North Carolina CEC, that may be from our North Carolina Council for Administrators of Special Ed, which is a CASE, which is the administrators' organization as an arm of the Council for Exceptional Children. So they will get a full membership to CEC. They'll get the publications that come out, Teaching Exceptional Children and Exceptional Children, which is more of a research-based periodical that comes out. They will get those webinars, as I talked about, the peer support. They'll get a weekly email that gives updates on special education today, news, projects, legislation. It's just a wealth of information. And they'll be connected again to that national mentoring program with CEC. So that's year one. In year two, they will get all those things again, plus have free access to 2 CEC webinars and high-level practices, leverage practices in special ed, which is an online book. We're also trying to work out a strand that they would be able to participate in at our conference in November. So probably not this coming conference, but the following conference in 2021. And every year we will plan to start a cohort. So we're going to be getting these teachers that are year one teachers right now started. They will be the ones getting a little short change, but we'll still make sure they get everything that was in that year one. And then they will roll into year two, and we'll start a new cohort next fall with year one. So we'll have 2 cohorts running at the same time. They have to commit to doing all those things, like attending the webinars and participating in cohort collaborative virtual meetings, things like that. And each EC director will also sign off on that just as an assurance that we all know they're getting that support. But we're doing this as part of our recruitment and retention, and the directors were really excited about it last week. They felt like this would make a difference just to get them to the forefront to realize there are a lot of people here to support them. Because what we find is a lot of our districts may have nothing but new EC teachers, or a new EC teacher and 2 lateral entry teachers. And so they don't have anybody to reach out to in their own district. And I'm saying district meaning charter schools or traditional schools, traditional districts, to ensure that they've got that collegial support. So we are hoping this will make a difference. Virginia has done this. A couple other states have done this program, and it's been very effective. And so we've kind of taken what they did and built on it a little more, because we built in that mentoring piece as well. My goal is that we'll be able to expand this, because my next approach is going to be looking at those high needs teachers in our low incidence populations, but that are critically diverse in their skill set and greatly needed, like teachers of the hearing impaired, teachers of the visually impaired, and even autism in some spaces, and moving towards some of that regional support we've been talking about. So that's kind of next on the list. And then with that, our related service providers, because we don't have enough school psychologists, we don't have enough speech pathologists in some places, or occupational therapists, or physical therapists, or audiologists. So we've got some work to do, but that's a real focus for me and for our team. Last good news is that we are moving to a brand new grant system where the districts apply for that subrecipient IDEA grant, or our federal funding. But included in that now, we will have merged the preschool grant with the K through 12 grant, And so they're going to complete one grant with both components in place, which will save time for our directors, I believe. They're not having to repeat information, and it'll be very connected and we hope very fluid. But also all of our special programs grants. So when we do Risk Pool or Developmental Day, bless you,
Thank you.
or Special State Reserve, those grants will all have been up to this point, up until this year, they have been paper and pencil. This year, we moved them into an electronic format. Starting next year, they will be in the grant system so that a director would not have to import, again, every bit of information in these grants individually, but it'll pull from that grant platform they've already opened up, saving them time, saving them a lot of resources, and saving us a whole lot of paper and expense of mailing those pieces in. Because now we have a statewide student data system that we can pull information where before we couldn't because the whole state wasn't on the same platform. So we don't need IEP copies to show that there are goals addressing that behavior support if they're applying for Risk Pool. We'll be able to pull that up electronically. So we are getting into the age of virtual work, which is pretty exciting. So I have a couple, one last update, and it's around our SLD policies, our specific learning disability policies. And I think Matt shared some of this with you back in December when you met. And if you'll apologize, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to apologize, but I need to grab my water. Not have a coronavirus, I have asthma. That's why the cough is there. I just feel like I need to wear a tag around my neck. So the rationale initially when we did this policy back in 2016 is that we need to shift so that our policy doesn't prohibit, so that our policy prohibits use of just cognitive discrepancy. There is no longer research out in the field. This was a very old practice that we've hung on to for a very long time. It doesn't mean that the cognitive IQ score isn't important, but we've based solely on that. And we need to be looking at how that student responds to instruction, where they have their gaps, where they are getting really good instruction that we're tracking, and yet it's not making a difference, and we need to do something different. So the reasons are up there of why this cognitive discrepancy is not the best model to use, because we've waited for them to fail dramatically. And by that, I mean, if we did an evaluation and the student only had 12 points of discrepancy between their IQ and their academic performance, they didn't qualify. We had to wait till that gap got so big that it hit that 15-point discrepancy mark, which was what our state had adopted. So those psychometric reasons, it really was not identifying students with an SLD using that model until really typically after third grade, because that's how long it took for that gap to get wide enough. There's a lot of research that's been done on this, but there is no empirical evidence that that cognitive assessment alone informs the instruction or the need for services. So we have a policy that was approved in 2016 by the state board, February of 2016, that goes into effect July 1 of 2020. And there's apparently a buzzword out in the field that's LD 2020, and we didn't put that on it, but the field apparently has, and someone in our agency was asked about LD 2020, and they didn't know what they were talking about. So if you hear that, it's about the SLD policy that goes into effect. But in December, we pulled, again, because we've had multiple stakeholders over the last probably going back into 2014, where we started pulling stakeholders together to do this work to look at changing our policy. We pulled another stakeholder group together with a statewide representatives, but we also had some national representatives there from LDA and some other groups that had a different lens for us, because we were getting still comments, concerns, letters to OSEP, letters to us about some of the language that was in the proposed policy, or not proposed, the adopted policy that was to take effect July 1. We had in place an opportunity if districts felt like they were ready to go ahead and move forward with that policy of July 1, 2020, they could. And so we had 2 LEAs who did submit that intent to implement, meaning they are now using the new adopted policy, and that was allowable. They could adopt that policy prior to July 1, and it's Rutherford County and Alexander County. So we pulled the stakeholder group together, and I don't know, it was November or it was December. I'm actually thinking it was December. But we pulled this group together. We had an internal meeting in November and then pulled this group together to start looking at the language that was problematic and see what we could do to make that more palatable, to get that additional feedback on and not change again the intent of what we are doing with the policy that takes effect in on July 1, but that it doesn't create problems or barriers that were unintentional. So the things that came out of that stakeholder group was basically 3 asks: to define research and intervention or evidence-based research interventions, to put that in the definition so that we're all working from the same place on that definition, to remove the language that was related to group comparisons among culturally and linguistically similar peers. And that's really the one that gave people the biggest heartburn. And it wasn't worth keeping if people feel that that was going to impair students being identified who need to be identified. And then lastly, defining SLD as a disorder, because I think we had used the word disability, but IDEA hasn't been reauthorized since 2004, and it still uses the word disability. So what you see here, if you can see this, and if not, you will have this slide if you're online and just on the phone. It's been sent out. Okay, great. Is the changes that we made. So we've defined scientific research-based intervention, which we're also calling evidence-based because those 2 terms have become rather interchangeable out in the field. And so we're trying not to isolate one or the other. We're kind of pulling it all together. I'm not going to read this definition to you, but we feel like this is a very strong but yet clear defining terminology to help people understand what scientific research-based intervention or evidence-based research means. So in other words, using flashcards, working with a student who may have a visual processing difficulty would not really be an evidence-based research practice. That's a gross example, but that's where we're going, that we've tried to define this so that we make sure that the interventions align with the identified needs of the student. This was the language that was in the current policy that's online that was to go in effect July 1, or will go in effect July 1. And this is where we've struck the language that folks ask us to change. And here's where we have replaced disorder with disability, and again, cleaned up some of that language and hopefully met the needs and the concerns of the field. One place we had a lot of discussion is under that 2I, disabilities not included, because it says near the end, or of environmental, cultural, or economic disadvantage, but that is language directly from IDEA. So while that cultural piece was concerning, we felt we had to align back with IDEA as closely as we could, and so that's what we've done. So our process with this is that it will go to the state board, to our rules committee. Anything that is a policy change has to go through rules to make sure it aligns with all policies by the board prior to it going to the board for approval. We are probably putting that then back out in April. I don't foresee any hiccups or holdups from the Rules Committee that would prevent us from doing that. We'll have another 30-day public comment period on these changes, and then our plan is to go back to the board with this language change in May and in June. We're trying to be totally transparent. There's some question as to whether what we're doing is really technical changes or if it's really changing the policy, because what we're doing is really fixing the language. But to be totally transparent to the field, we're going to go back out with public comment. And then the goal is to have that approved by state board at the June board meeting, and it will become effective July 1, 2020. So it's really the same policy. We've just removed the language. So the cognitive requirement, cognitive assessment requirement will still be gone, but it doesn't mean that can't be a part of the comprehensive evaluation. And we have to keep saying that. We have never said that there can't be a cognitive assessment. It just can't be the only piece of information that's used to make that determination. Do you have any questions about any of that information?
No, thank you. Thank you.
I told you more than you wanted to know, probably. But I hope it was helpful. Were there questions online? Okay. If there are questions later on, I'm happy to take those. They'll just email them to me. I'm happy to do that and give a response to Alexis to send back out to everyone. Okay. Thank you. And thank you all for what you do and for being available, even virtually. I think we're in a new era right now where we're going to have to do a whole lot of listening rather than visual communication, but at least we have the technology to do that. So thank you all.
Thank you. So I should have a copy of the annual report for 2018-2019 out to the council by the end of this week for them to review. So we won't be finalizing the 2018-2019 annual report today. We've done public comments, and we decided that committee work would not be appropriate in this kind of venue, that we will move that to our June meeting. Announcements.
May I make a recommendation? We do have lunch here for our council members that are participating in person. And because we have a public comment period that is open until 12:30, meaning those individuals wishing to address the council should sign in by that time, I would suggest that we take a lunch break, and at 12:30, if those of our members that are participating virtually can log back in or attend to the screen at 12:30, we'll provide an update regarding whether or not anyone else has signed up for public comment. And then at that time, I'll defer to the chair and the co-chair about whether it would be appropriate to adjourn the meeting at that time, provided no one else has signed up. Is that agreeable to the chair?
That's agreeable, yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to, well, we've got all those folks and always worried that someone comes back on after. Do we want to look at the June, September, and December 9th dates? Just to double check, because if we do have new folks, when do we do our new members? Is that June? Maybe I'm asking a bad question.
I just had to think a moment because I think the new term begins July 1. So
Okay.
technically, I think
Worry
we
about
do our
it.
orientation in September.
Okay. Then we could probably deal with it later. I just was thinking with new members on, just to look at those dates real quick to make sure that that works with the vast majority of folks' schedule.
So in September, we usually do a 30-minute before the meeting, new member orientation.
Okay. So maybe in June, one of the items that we talk about, or prior to June, is the folks that we want to, that roll off in those positions and the diverse roles that they play, and soliciting for new memberships for those particular roles and making sure we have our required, number of parents and different districts and all those kinds of important things.
Okay.
So I can add a little bit of detail to that, and for those of you that are participating remotely, I'll just repeat, we have a question on the table about current membership to make sure that we have all the required participants and all the roles filled. If we will send out an updated membership list. Had you been here today in person, you would have had a hard copy of that. And we're realizing as we're going through the agenda, the need to make sure electronic copies are available at every meeting. Regardless, in looking forward, we want to make sure that we have all of the vacancies filled, and the priority in filling those vacancies are of parents or individuals with disabilities. We want to make sure that those are the majority. What I can share with you is that the State Board of Education is the entity that appoints those individuals. And I do know that at the last 2 state board meetings, if I'm not mistaken, that Sherry has requested or provided a reminder that we have some vacancies that they need to appoint.
Okay.
And we have identified some of the regional areas in which we don't have representation. Out west comes to mind as an area that potentially needs to have someone recommended. Now, from time to time, the state board will ask us if we have any interested individuals that have contacted us that would otherwise meet the criteria. They have not asked us for that information at this time, and so we are just continuing to put it before them that we need replacements for those vacancies that we have identified now, and we are planning to get ahead of those terms that are expiring. With regard to the legislative appointments, Sherry has been working with our the appropriate agency liaisons on both sides of the table to encourage them to either fill that position or renew a term. I'm sorry, Christy, you had a question?
Nope, you answered it.
Okay, and so we are attending to that. I'm not certain that there's any specific action that the council would need to take other than if you are aware of someone who would meet the criteria for membership on the council and would potentially ensure that we have adequate representation across the state. I would encourage them to contact the state board member that represents their area and explain their interest in serving on the council. And typically what is asked of them is that they provide a resume and a cover letter explaining why they would like to participate on the council and how they meet the criteria for meeting the membership. And I know that's a lot of details to remember. You can connect those individuals with myself, Alexis, or Danielle, and we can walk through all those particulars if you can just identify someone that might be willing to serve.
And the areas you're looking for are currently the west.
I think the West, if you look in parentheses by those numbers, those are the old, by their names, that's the old district numbers. We don't have anyone in District 8, which I believe is the Western, and then 2, we don't have representative, and that's the Southeast. And so that just comes to mind right away where we don't have an individual represented. And again, the first and foremost criteria that we're looking for is a parent or an individual with a disability to serve in those roles. That would be the primary characteristic.
So Diane Coffey and I had a conversation, and we thought that Alexis would be a good person, a point person to talk with the various special education advisory committees in these areas.
Okay.
We don't have representation.
Okay.
So Diane, if you're on.
The other, thank you, Diane, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say what you said, definitely I think we need to make sure we're covering areas that we don't have representation in. I know I'm the northwestern part, but, you know, there's a lot of rural areas besides my areas, I feel like we don't have as much representation. So we definitely be looking and talking to maybe some of the parent council, supervisory council
So we'll be happy to work toward that end through Alexis's role. She's reinstating the parent cohort, the collaboratives too, so that may lend a communication opportunity. Additionally, we're happy to provide something through the parent listserv. I think we've discussed that before. The only limitation there is if we don't have individuals that have signed up for the listserv, that communication is going to be somewhat limited, but that's certainly an avenue we can explore. And then we can talk to our partners in advocacy groups as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't know about everybody, but I know that I put out like a director's message in our weekly communication. And if you were able to reach out to like Mike or somebody up in that Region 8, I think he's Region 8, so they might have a director's advisory council that they have a few folks on it that would be willing to volunteer.
Sure. We're happy to explore any opportunity available to us. And also, I think that it might be helpful if we perhaps did a little one-pager and maybe provided it to the council membership now, so that if you're in a conversation with someone, you have a one-pager that you can provide through your contacts. So if that sounds like something you'd like to pursue, just give us a little bit of time to get that together, and we would distribute that to you all as well.
Yes, we certainly like that.
Okay? And so I have 11:47. So for the group that is participating virtually, if you can feel comfortable taking a break and then logging right back on, or turning your speakers back on at 12:30, we want to make sure that we end our meeting within the protocol and that we have observed our requirements to make a public comment available should anyone sign in between now and 12:30. So thank you for your participation. We'll be unmuting the mics again at 12:30.
Thank you.
Do you know how to? Huh? Yeah. I used to know.
I don't think she went far. So
I have Lawrence.
Getting better.
You know how to turn the mic on? Okay, perfect. All right. I get one of you back and the other one's on.
you already did it.
Okay. All right. Are we ready to go back live?
We're ready to go
Okay,
back?
she's gonna turn us on. All right, good afternoon, council members. It's 12:31, and we're coming back together just to determine if we have anything else that we need to discuss, and to be certain that we have concluded the council's business today. So there have been no additional individuals signing in requesting the opportunity to deliver public comment. And so I'm going to give it back to our chair, Cynthia Daniels Hall, and look to her guidance for how she would like to continue this meeting.
So I'd like to know if any council members have anything else they want to talk about or add before we close out the meeting? Or any questions?
Thank you. Was that message about getting Sherry's slide sent before you send it?
Sherry slides?
Yes, I sent them.
Because you already sent it. I didn't know if that was.
I
before.
did,
Okay.
yes. I think all of these responses are up to date.
Okay.
Okay?
So if there's nothing else for the council agenda, I suggest we take a motion to close the meeting.
Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll motion to adjourn.
We have a motion from Christy to adjourn. Do we have a second?
That's Christy Grant.
Christy Grant.
Christy Grant is providing the second. So,
Thank you
Oh,
all.
Leanna, George.
Indiana. Okay.
okay, so it looks like, we are in agreement that we can adjourn the meeting.
Yes, we are.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks, everyone.
Ooh.
Drop the camera.
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Carol Ann.
Sure. Information was coming in late yesterday, and then everybody was trying to make a decision, and so I appreciate you guys being flexible for my panicky call and email, just wanting to be sure.
No, it wasn't even
Yeah.
on my radar about doing something different. 'Cause
Uh-huh.
like when you've been in the school.
Oh,
mode,
of
and you're like,
course.
There's discipline coming here, there's bus issues coming here, and then like I finished the last IP and it's 6:15, and I'm like, oh crud, like that's tomorrow. I mean, I knew I was coming
Oh, yeah.
here, but like in your mind, it's like email happens.
Yeah, I was in a similar boat. I was involved in a big planning meeting for some other work yesterday, so we were very focused on that task. And then when I came up for air, the emails had started coming in for the coronavirus, so I was trying to get up to speed to that. And then I got to the one where it said, we're curtailing or strongly advising that meetings be taken to a different format. I was like, wow, I have a meeting tomorrow. You know, so I think it ended well. I think having part of the virtual meeting as part of our normal option, people were already self-selecting. Yeah. And our caterer, she's like, this is not the first call we've had about this, and so because we didn't really have a quick way to get around to see who was going to come, we asked her just to reduce the order in half. We figured we couldn't go wrong that way, maybe, so. But we appreciate you guys
Those are
driving
the people
in.
I think about. I worry, like,
Uh-huh.
if they're, I mean, clearly she's, a largest enough establishment, but she's probably already purchased that amount of food, right? You know, you think about those people.
Yeah, because we called her yesterday about the time this was going down and asked her what her cancellation window would be. And she says, I'm just working with people right now because I know things are happening suddenly. So that was really nice of
Yeah,
her.
very nice.
Yeah.
Do we need to grab?
Thank you. We're finished for today. Do you need travel reimbursement items? Okay. Thank you both.